Welcome to Analyzing Data with Minitab. In this session, we're going to explore the analysis possibilities with Minitab. We're interested in looking at on-time delivery for this startup company, and the manager of shipping is also very interested in looking at his cost per pound in terms of shipping efficiency. So to get started, we need to make sure that we have this information. So we're going to have to create a few variables. We're going to go to the full data set worksheet. We have I have 21 columns, variables in this worksheet. If I go up to the calc menu and use the calculator, I can create a new variable. Now where it says store result in variable, if I'm using a one-word variable name, I just need to type that variable. But I'm going to define on-time delivery as the date that it was promised minus the date that it was shipped. Minitab now creates a new variable called on-time delivery and puts it in the next available column. So I'm going to go back and calculate cost per pound. Define cost per pound as the shipping charge divided by the weight that was sent. Notice because I put cost per pound in single quotes, I was able to include some spaces in my name. Well, on-time delivery, let's take a look what that looks like. The stat menu is very extensive in terms of all the capabilities for Minitab. Under basic statistics, we have summary information, all of the hypothesis test information, normality test, things like that. Recently, though, Minitab added this assistant, which is a way of making not only the analysis, choosing the right options, but understanding the output much easier. So I'm going to show you basically most of the analysis using the assistant. So if I wanted a graphical representation, I'll pick graphical analysis. Now in the assistant, under all of those major headings, the first thing you generally come to is a decision tree, and it's helping you. What is your objective? Well, I'd like to graph the distribution of the data. And so that helps me know that I'm interested in these types of graphs, and I'd like to start with the graphical summary. How are your data arranged? All of mine are in one column. I'm interested in on-time delivery right now, and we'll just say okay. And the last chart that comes up is basically a graphical summary. I have a histogram of the data with a normal distribution of the same mean and standard deviation superimposed over that. I also have a box plot. I have a time series plot of the data, and also down here at the bottom I have a test for normality, and instead of just giving you the p-value, it's actually telling you the decision is passed. This data would pass a test for normality. I have some descriptive statistics, otherwise known as a numerical summary. How many observations are included? What's the mean, standard deviation, etc. And they also provide 95% confidence intervals. I think the graphical summary is a great place to start to get a feeling for your data. On-time delivery means difference between the date it was promised and the date it was shipped was 0 or greater than 0. So let's take a look. Maybe I want to test the hypothesis that on-time delivery, its average, we are meeting that 0 or shipping when we promise. So I'm going to compare one sample with a target. This happens to be a one sample t-test. The data are in on-time delivery. My target is actually 0. And I'd like to determine if the on-time delivery is less than 0. When I say okay, the last thing that comes up is a summary report. It gives some statistics as far as the mean confidence interval and the mean standard deviation. It gives a histogram of the data here. This is the average of the data, and this is that confidence interval on the average. And over here, this green marker is the target. Notice how they do not overlap. When they don't overlap, you can conclude that the mean is not equal to the target. One of the things I really like about the assistant is this comments box, where in plain language it says you can conclude that the mean is less than 0. Using the assistant makes hypothesis testing and also understanding the results much easier. Now back to our friends in shipping. To know cost per pound, is it different depending on whether we ship by air, by courier, or by ground? That also falls under the category of hypothesis test, but in this case it's what we call a one-way ANOVA, because there are 3 different methods of shipping. So we have 3 different populations. All the data are not in separate columns in this case. The Y data in one column, the X's in another. So the Y data is this cost per pound. The X variable, right, is going to be the method. You need to double click to get that selected. And what we find out in our summary report here is, do the means differ? Yes, they do. There is a significant difference among the means. They also have ground for courier and for air. In the comments section, you can conclude that there are differences among the means. If you look up here, it's helping you to decide which means differ. Number 1 is ground, number 2 is courier, number 3 is air. And it's saying that ground is different than number 3, which would be air. So I can conclude that ground is different than air. I can conclude that courier is different than air as well. Courier, different than air. And I can conclude that air is different than both courier and ground. What I can't say is that there's a significant difference between ground and courier. We're going to be talking about non-parametric statistics, right? If the assumptions of analysis of variance are not met, such as your data are not normally distributed, then you're going to want to use non-parametric methods. Now, there's no provision for non-parametric analysis in the assistant, so we'll have to go back to the regular stat menu here where it says non-parametrics. And it just so happens Mood's median test is the group we're going to use for more than 2 groups when we're not confident that the data follows a similar distribution. The response, again, is cost per pound. The factor is the shipping method. And now we get output that tells us, a p-value less than 0.05 means there are significant differences. And when I look at these confidence intervals, even not using the assumptions of normality, I can tell that the cost for air shipping, cost per pound, is much greater than courier or ground. Same information. Now, another thing that you've been exposed to in Greenbelt is control charts. And the assistant can help with control charts as well. The first, is it continuous data, variables data, or is it attribute data? But in looking at the sale, and now we'll go into the assistant for control charts, and I'm interested just in the bids. So we have a stable amount of bids all about the same amount. And so the data are in the column value. And it's going to want to know, how are you going to determine the control limits in center line? Your choices are estimate from the data or use known value. So we're going to estimate from the data. And it goes through, and now I have a summary report that says the process mean is stable. No data points are out of control. And now this is a time series chart of all the bids. And you can see just random variation. On average, our bids are about $5,000. It might be interesting to know, are things different month to month? If you go under the regular stat menu, control charts, this is variables data for individuals, we can plot this value. Down here in the options is a very useful thing called stages. Now we have this variable called month that shows, which month the bid was made in. If I include that, what I end up with is a control chart that basically has separate mean, center line, and control limit for January, February, March, April, May, June. In this particular case, you can see that pretty much it's stable over the 6 months. Another thing that we're often interested in is process capability analysis. So let's go back to the full data set. Using the assistant, we can do capability analysis. And again, we were interested in on-time delivery, which is a continuous variable. And so the data are in one column. It's on-time delivery. We don't really have subgroups. We want to use individual values, so we'll set the constant subgroup size equal to 1. And our target is 0. And as far as specifications, we like to be 1 day late. And now Minitab goes through and has done a complete capability analysis on this data. Here's a histogram of the data. Here's the target value. Here's the lower spec limit. I mean, just by inspection, we can see that we have a lot of opportunities for improvement. Is the process capable? How capable is it? Pretty low. Does the process mean differ from the target? Yes, it does. And I'll also have that information in this summary box written in plain language. Well, that's an introduction to some of the capability of Minitab. I mean, once you have the data organized such that columns are variables and rows are observations, the analysis becomes much easier. Using the assistant is really very beneficial because it's giving you some summary information. It no longer requires that you understand how to interpret the statistical jargon. Now it's your turn to practice. Enjoy.